Welcome, Cameron Thompson, to my show. Good Hobbit morning.
It's good to be here. Good morning.
Good morning, and I look forward to talking about the Hobbit with you today. Let's do a couple things first. First off, how's the weather there in Italy? How's the weather?
The weather is beautiful. It is a morning to be good on, actually afternoon here, but sunny and 60s in Fahrenheit terms. But gorgeous out, clear skies. How about Minnesota?
Well, it's morning here, and it's cruddy out, and wind is blowing from the north. It's going to drop down to about negative 16 degrees. It's snow and ice and sleet out right now, and pretty gray, so dark.
Negative 16 Fahrenheit?
Yeah, that's where we're going.
Ouch.
So don't envy me.
Those are numbers they don't even have here.
Don't envy me just because it's cold. I mean, you know, not everywhere can be perfect. So we're talking about the Hobbit today, and I think one of the first questions anybody would ask is, why are we qualified to talk about the Hobbit? Right? You know, not just Mo can talk about the Hobbit. So I guess I'll start off first. I've been reading the Hobbit since it was read to me as a boy by my father. And I remember nights by the fire there in Three Rivers, Michigan, and went through The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and several of the small tales. And so it's been in my life for as long as I can remember. It's really intricately wound up with my consciousness. But I've been teaching it. I think I started teaching it back in Texas when I was back there in Texas, and that was like 25 years ago plus. So I've been teaching The Hobbit pretty consistently, almost every year, to young people between 8th grade and 10th grade, pretty much every year since I started teaching. So again, it's one of the books. It's very, part and parcel of who I am as a teacher as well. I don't claim to be a scholar per se or published any essays, but I do think that I have sufficient experience with the novel. And more than that, I also have a great love for the novel too, which I think qualifies anybody to talk about a thing. Amateur, right?
Right.
How about you?
Me, I also grew up with The Hobbit. I had it read to me as a child, and The Lord of the Rings. Actually, that was the first. This was the thing when I was in elementary school. They had just initiated those. Computers had just kind of become a thing in the schools. The green screen,
Yes.
these Macintosh thing, the original Apple kind of bits there that were in all the public schools. And there was a program to incentivize reading among youths and children. And if you could rack up so many points by taking these quizzes on this computer thing that they would roll in on the old AV card. And you'd sit outside the classroom and you'd try and answer these trivia questions essentially about the book. And if you racked up enough points, you could get coupons. You'd get a free pizza at Pizza Hut. And that was and The Hobbit. When I was in 3rd grade, The Hobbit was the book that I did to do it, because it was it was one of these like mega points level books. It wasn't just How to Eat Fried Worms or something.
I read that book. Yeah, read for food program, kind of like the Hunger Games. Yeah, that seemed to have worked out really well for the majority of the population.
Right. Really conditioned them for the world they were entering into.
Oh yeah, because when you went to brown screen computers and then RGB computers, and then they have the mega chip and the super uber double quadruple mega chip with the extra processor, prepared you for being able to play Fortnite. So yeah.
Right.
Good.
So yeah, it's been with me, and I've been a big part of my life as well that way.
Have you ever taught it before in class?
I haven't actually. I look forward to doing so in the very near future, as some career trajectory is taking me towards, God willing, hopefully a philology position that I'm exploring right now, and the ability to teach it there. I've actually got a dear friend who teaches at a university, and he teaches it as part of his English, essentially an introduction to English as a foreign language. He uses The Hobbit or the Fellowship of the Ring to help with the high-level English learners to introduction to English literature.
But not the other two books.
No, he doesn't. I mean, there's not enough time in a semester to do the full thing, because they're going into it as a piece of literature to get habituated to also then this worldview, obviously, is a part of that.
that's the stickler, that great series is that you get into the first book and how do you stop? It's like they're still out there, and there's still, the fellowship's broken, and Gandalf is, well, not to give away a spoiler here, but Gandalf's dead, and
Right.
stop at that point. And you're right, it's a voluminous piece of work. Yeah, you'd have to take almost a whole year to teach it.
I mean, as we will find, look at my little crystal palantir here, we're looking into the future, we're set up to speak about a chapter of The Hobbit a week, and that'll take us well into the summer.
It will, yeah.
And that's just The Hobbit.
And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with...
Well, absolutely. And I think that's...
Yeah, I'm okay with teaching and talking about it over that period of time, but Tolkien's works are not, like you said, what was the work you used, How to Eat Fried Worms? It's not, not like that. It's not like some work you just breeze through and give a quick synopsis and move on. There's so much in his works. I was looking at C.S. Lewis' work the other day, The Silver Chair, which I do still love, but I don't want to bash Lewis too much, but the difference is pretty stark between Lewis and Tolkien.
Yeah. It's stark. It's a stark difference.
I was surprised to find out too that Tolkien got really mad at him in a couple of instances because Lewis would write and send immediately to publishers, no revisions at all. That was his habit, and so all those
that explains a lot.
Those Narnia books are first drafts, baby.
Wow. Well,
yeah. And I think Tolkien, because Tolkien's legendarily a guy who was a stickler for detail. I mean, right down to moon cycle, armor structures, and maps, and he just would rewrite a thing over and over again. And got Allen and Unwin's nerves, his publishers, because he wouldn't send things in on time. But what he sent in, I mean, gosh, talk about craftsmanship! Amazing pieces, really amazing pieces. And this book, as an introduction, I mean, people who haven't read The Hobbit, if you haven't read The Hobbit yet, where have you been? It's like, gee whiz, I've never heard of that country, America, or whatever. It's pretty darn ubiquitous these days, partly because of Jackson's lousy treatment of it in the movies, but it's been around for a while. So,
and it's worth reading. It's no time like the present to start reading it if you haven't read it, and if you have read it, read it again more recently with fresh eyes, right? Because it's, as you found, Will, I'm sure too, rereading, especially a book like this, you read it as a different person as you read it over time, which means the story itself changes because the narrative enters into your narrative, and your narrative's now different. So you see things differently.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. We always had the discussion about Beowulf in high school because Beowulf was read for, and we've read that already. Parents would say we should read other books, so let's move on. But my colleague and I used to say, no, you read it as bookends, freshman and senior year, because the book doesn't change, but you do. And and the goal of art is to prompt anagogy, prompt self-reflection and understanding. Because you couldn't do much worse than take a phenomenal work like Beowulf or Tolkien or the Iliad and reread it.
Right.
Because there's no doubt about it. It's a rich piece of material. Just some, quick things. The Hobbit, published in 1937, written originally for his kids. They enjoyed the story so much, he put it down, he fleshed it out, and then it was so popular that everybody said, you need a sequel. And so he wrote The Lord of the Rings from that. So the Lord of the Rings was written in two waves. One was where I'm writing a sequel, and then suddenly he switched gears and said, no, I'm writing a whole new thing. And so Lord of the Rings takes on, that's why some sections in Lord have like the Tom Bombadil and things like this, because he wrote them originally as sort of entertaining for kids, and then it's like, I'm working that into a bigger thing. And so he reworked stuff. But The Hobbit itself, there's that famous story of him in his job as a philologist, finding a blank page in the composition notebook. You know this story, right? Any teacher knows that one of the biggest onerous tasks in the job is to grade the essays. Essays. It's like you've got 3 or 4 page essays from, say, 50 to 100 students. It's going to take you forever, and they're they're not always great. So going through one of those books and finding a blank page suddenly, and he was overjoyed by it. And that's where he wrote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," which was the genesis for this whole book. And of course, he'd been mulling it over and thinking it because he was steeped in all that Norse tradition and the Kalevala and all.
Yeah.
But I wanted to segue in because I've got a couple different subjects I'd like to see if we can hit. And for clarity's sake, I'll go over them here. The one is that a connection between the Hobbit and the dragon. Another one is I want to talk about his Tookish side and what that means, the Tookish side. I want to talk about nature mythology. Oh, and by the way, I have old school going on here. So I've got this is old school, and that's what I'm using over here.
That's right.
So I want to talk, and you said you wanted to talk about names and word meanings. Absolutely. That was so awesome.
Yeah.
And then dwarves.
Yeah. The names and the meaning of words, I think, is a foundation. I mean, it's really what he opens up the chapter with, which is just he opens up the book with. But the power of the map, and then the dwarf song.
Okay, good. Well, let me start with an opening question, sort of a leading question, because you had mentioned this earlier about how it's worthwhile rereading it and all. The book itself is worthwhile reading in the first place. We talked about why it's worthwhile rereading. Why is the book worthwhile reading at all, do you think?
Because if you read it, really read it, that is to say, there's different ways you can read a book, right? I think this book in particular, I would recommend somebody actually enter into it. I mean, if you enter in along with Bilbo, allow yourself to accompany him, to peer over his shoulder from the very beginning through to the end, you'll find that you yourself are undergoing a transformation, because it's not just a book, it's not just a story in the way we tend to approach stories in the sort of in the modern industrial West, that is as a lower form of film or something like that, of cheap summer blockbuster, but that it is a different kind of thing, that it's actually meant to be. And I would make the case elsewhere at some other time in another conversation that the genesis of books themselves was actually, to use the word, psychotherapeutic or sort of mythotherapeutic in terms of the way that they're meant to be used. Is not merely something to be read as something outside of myself, but rather something that enters into me, and thus I enter into. And I think The Hobbit is just such a story of transformation in that way.
Okay, that's very good. And I'll have to probe that other idea at a future date. Given that, and I agree with what you just said, I think that the position I hold is that all art is in some way transformative. It acts like an anagogical catalyst. And by anagogy, I mean self-reflection. If the goal in life is not to acquire tons of money or material goods, but rather to understand who you are in the universe, if that's the goal, then we have to have these tools to spark that movement forward, so we don't just sit there atrophy. So it's really, I guess you could look at it as sort of a spiritual catalyst, a spiritual converter, where it changes you as a human being, as you said.
Yeah.
You read the work and you're suddenly like, oh, that's me. I've been through that. I understand that. I also think it gives a language for the experience that we have had or we will have. And one of the things I can imagine is to go through life and have no language for the thing that you just experienced. There's a great story by Ambrose Bierce, I think it's called Chickamauga, where the little boy sees all this horrible stuff going on and finally gets back to his own house, and his house is burned down, his mother's killed in the Civil War. And he's there, but he can't scream. He has no voice. He's a mute. And you only find that out at the end of the story. The point being is that if you do go through some horrendous thing and you have no way of talking about it, you have no language, you're just suffering blindly like a worm, like enduring this horrendous thing, but you have no way of talking about it. So I think that it gives us a language for things.
That is supremely important, and something that's very, very dear to my heart, very, very strong very powerful in my immediate experience, is the real deepening realization as an immigrant. I've moved to Italy from the United States, and as an immigrant, the experience of not having words for something, and not just to express myself, but even to have a name for whatever that kind of animal is that's flitting about in the trees. That's the limits of my world. I can see it. I can experience it my experience of things without having the words for them has been more superficial than the experience of things for which I have the words.
How fascinating.
Let alone being able to express yourself.
Yeah.
And it's harder to hold on to. It's harder to remember, to engage with, to enter into. But if I know that this particular thing has this name, also I have to give it a name of my own for it. But without that, then we have a relationship, right? And
yes.
So I can find out the name for a thing and a place, for that matter. And now there's a rapprochement between me and the thing, which is me and my entire environment.
And also then between you and an audience of other humans too, which allows
absolutely.
I was experiencing this with trying to talk to young people about movies, and they haven't seen movies and they don't know movies, and so you can't talk to them about it because they have no language to talk about it. They've never seen things like Battleship Potemkin or Cool Hand Luke or anything like that, so they can't talk about that.
Yeah.
And it's really it's a connection between you and the world, a connection with yourself, a connection with other human beings. If you don't share that language, you're kind of in this little prison house. You're trapped. May I say, you're somewhat in a hole in the ground, right?
Yeah, you may say that, right? And that's
because I think that's how to frame this. I think a lot of what goes on in the novel of the Hobbit is about exactly that, right there.
Yeah, right. It's
because the problem of Bilbo at the very beginning is not that he's chubby. It's not that he smokes too much. It's not that he's in a heterosexual male normative world. The problem is he's totally alone, and not much is made. But the very opening shows he's totally alone. He lives in his hole. He's comfortable. He's satisfied. He's got everything he possibly needs, but there's no one else around. No one else around. Right. It's a bright day, so you don't think that's bad. But where are the other hobbits?
Yeah.
Where's Bilbo? Where are all the little Bilbo Bagginses running around? There's nobody else there. He's totally isolated. He's up on a hill.
Mm-hmm.
And one can make the argument, and I have made the argument, so I know I am one. One can make the argument that to a certain degree, he has the potential for becoming a dragon at the very start of the story.
Say more to that.
The dragon is, in Western culture, and certainly in the mind of Tolkien, the dragon is the quintessential example of isolated loneliness. And he goes back to Beowulf in this, where Grendel and Grendel's Dam are like dragonish characters. And there's a dragon at the end.
There's a good dragon in the end, yeah.
Dragon lives alone. It is violent. It has a horde with it. It lives in the ground, so it's kind of like in a tomb. It's inhuman. It's cold. It's scaly. It breathes fire, which is the element of intellect, but it breathes it randomly, so it just melts everything. So like the guy that goes off on a rant or a tirade, in the comment section. The dragon is essentially a twisted being. It's a being that is isolated and alone and twisted. And there's something terrible about a dragon. And obviously lives alone. Dragons don't associate with one another either. They fight with each other and create their territory, that don't come into my soul. So what we see at the beginning of the story is it opens, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty wet hole nor a dry sandy hole, but a hole that was comfortable, because that's,
right.
That's where he is. He's comfortable. And then it describes his rooms and his closets and his pantries, and he has tons of stuff. So there's that treasure hoard.
Yeah.
And he's living on top of a hill, which is kind of like a mountain. And what does he do on a bright sunny morning after he's cleaned up the dishes? He goes out and he smokes a pipe, which is the fire coming out of the dragon's mouth. Fumes
coming forth from him. Yeah.
So at the beginning, he's kind of an innocuous dragon. He's like Puff the Magic Dragon at the beginning,
He's a very bourgeois dragon.
Bourgeois. I like that. Yes. Bilbo, the bourgeois.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is comic. And I think he intends it to be comic beginning. So we, on the one hand, so we find it enjoyable, but also so we don't notice what the crisis of the novel. Because the crisis of the novel is if you stay that way, you're in a bad spot. You know, you're going to have a bad
Even
time.
though because you're not, which sounds to me like that's actually a very dangerous place to be, because if you're a villain, you know you're a villain. The other people know you're a villain. You're a bad guy. If you're just a comfortable guy, we feel like that's not so bad. In fact, that's kind of the aim of a lot of people's lives, is to get to that
Comfort.
50-year-old Bilbo Baggins status, and now you're good.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that that's actually at a deeper level. You're just at early dragon stage.
Yeah, and I think we've really not to draw on recent history, but I think we've seen a lot of that in recent era, where people are we're comfortable enough and we can stay isolated in our homes. We don't have to go out, but after a while, you start clawing the walls. You're like Charlotte Perkins with the yellow wallpaper.
Yeah, I was just gonna play peeling apart the yellow wallpaper. Yeah,
it's like you almost go demented. It's not a good state to be in. And even though you can buy that $11 bottle of mustard down at Sam's Club that you've been craving for so long, and sit in front of the tube and watch the Super Bowl game, is that enough? I mean, really, is that really enough for human life? Is human life only just to sit and eat, as Shakespeare writes? Because it seems to me there's something more. And I think Tolkien was saying there's something more than this. That self-satisfaction, that spherical state that Bilbo was in at the beginning, he doesn't know that he's suffering, and yet, yes, I think he is.
Like Kierkegaard's man who's suffering, lives of quiet despair, unbeknownst to themselves.
Right. We certainly see that is the case in The Lord of the Rings later on, when it says that Bilbo he wasn't that he was young, just that he was well preserved. The ring that he later on kind of stretches out that condition and elongates it, see it better. He's not happy. He's not prosperous. Again, there's still no Mrs. Baggins. So whatever Hobbit, and I do think he does conquer this in the Hobbit, it doesn't go away. And the ring is the problem. The ring stretches it out later on. So you see it, and so it becomes very stark there. But here it's not even stark because he's charming. He makes cakes in the morning. He's kind of chubby, cute little guy. Don't see that there's anything wrong in the situation.
Right, he's all prim and proper, and everything is just right. But that's precisely what flusters it. Like Gandalf comes in totally unexpected and shatters his world, shakes him up to the point where he's agitated psychologically. He's sort of in a mild state of trauma that he's totally dysregulated. Yes, Gandalf has just gotten him to invite him to tea, and he's just no, thank you, go away, no adventures, thank you very much, come Wednesday, we'll have tea, very good, and then slams the door.
Yes,
and he's all worked up. He's tried to he's had this confrontation. So when things get a little bit out of their perfect order, he actually gets quite put off by this.
That's a real indicator, and I don't think much is made of this when people read it the first time, but it says in the opening, it says he liked visitors, and then it goes on to something else. But then when the dwarves show up, he doesn't like visitors. He likes them on his own terms.
He likes it when he knows them ahead of time and invites them himself. When he controls the whole thing.
And that is a huge element. I mentioned in our pre-video session, I mentioned that Guardini makes a really interesting point in the modern world, where he says that when that old world of the medieval realm collapses, the only thing you're really left with is the acquisition of power or control. And I think he's spot on. I think, we're seeing so much of that right now, that the acquisition of power is what we default to when we lose sight of what we really should be about. So if we're going to frame what's the problem with Bilbo? What's the big deal with Bilbo? I think we could kind of put it in those terms. If he doesn't find a way to change from this bourgeois dragonishness, he fall into eventually this idea that acquiring power. He already has
Right.
it. The richest hobbit in Hobbiton, and which is like
Right.
being famous in Poland or something, He already doesn't like visitors. He already controls everything in his house. But there's no fruitfulness to Bilbo. There's no family.
That's exactly right. He becomes like that the rich man, or the rich man of the gospel, who says, he's abundant harvest. He's got all these things. Great, I can tear down my barns and fill up new ones, because I'll say to my soul, soul, you have many things. Let's eat, drink, and be merry. We don't need to work anymore. And then obviously he dies, and in that parable, the angel comes to him at the night and says, "Fool, this night your soul will be required of you, and these things that you've built up, whose will they be?"
Yeah.
Indicating this man has no posterity. This man has no children, no inheritance.
Wait, what are you going to donate it to a library, buddy? I mean, come on. You're right. It's like there's nothing there, and that is it's a serious critique too of the ancient world, where the ancient world used to talk about how one of the greatest things you could do is to make a legacy. Arete was a big deal for a guy, and he would create something people would remember him for years, which leads kind of to Ozymandias. Look on my works, you powerful in despair. Because not a lot there when there's nothing there. So you had mentioned earlier about the maps too. How do you? We don't get maps aside from the Dwarvish map in the.
Right.
We don't get maps besides the Dwarvish map in this
book.
Right. By the way, I'm not out on you. This is not geek power here. I was intentionally. You'd asked me about stuff, showing off stuff. I didn't show off stuff like showing my geek credits or anything. I just want to show people what's available. So you have Hobbit. I have Gold Hobbit. I'm higher ranked.
Gold Hobbit.
I'm higher ranked. That's no. Green Hobbit is what I grew up with. That was the home that what you have there. I can't find mine now. It's tragic. But the Gold Hobbit is the this is the we're coming up now, and I realize this. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of The Hobbit. Think about that for a minute. 37 will be the 100th anniversary. I think is that. Yeah, is that right?
Oh, sweet.
Wonderful. Yeah, 2037 will be the 100th anniversary. So we're coming close.
Wow.
So, but back to the beginning. We don't get in this book that extensive map that Lord of the Rings has. We have the Dwarvish map, which is quite as detailed as we see later on. So here's an early version of that, with fingers.
Right.
So if we take the two maps together, how did they contribute to this theme that we're talking about dragonishness and that need to awaken to other things? How do you think they contribute?
The maps, the two maps. I'm sorry, I missed what
the map in The Hobbit, and then the map in the. Tolkien didn't plate tectonics.
The Lord of the Rings map.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Plate tectonics not a thing yet, and so Tolkien was not making some sort of scientific world on which to place his characters. This is far more, I think, a mythological world he's creating. So consequently, they would fit into whatever theme he was developing in the book. If the theme we're talking about need to get away from bourgeois dragonishness, how do the maps contribute to that, or do they contribute to it, or is there some other significance to them?
They contribute profoundly to that, but the page keeps skipping me. Actually, that's we're given another map. We are in the published work. Those who have a privileged edition like ours, but you have this side view map of Hobbiton, right? Yeah. And for those out in Radioland who can't see this, that is there's the painting is essentially a watercolor looking kind of thing. I'm no art expert to say what the medium was, but it's that view from across the water, looking up the hill, and you see the mill in the foreground. But you've got, like you mentioned, this very the dragonish sort of situation of where Bilbo is. He's up atop the hill, outside where the town is, down by the water. Not unlike, as we see later, you've got Lake Town and you've got the town of Dale also right there, right against the water, whereas the dragon is up the hill. I mean, there's certainly parallels there. But these maps that we have here, rather I should say the map in The Hobbit, has essentially, it has the dragon at the far end. You've got the Hobbit over here, and the map clearly shows a journey from here to there and back again. Hence, Bilbo's own title for this book is There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday. But there's a lot of change that happens in between there, and I think it's significant, honestly, from my point of view, that the map is only encountered a little bit later into the into the chapter, a little bit later into the chapter, and that is, the ground has to be prepared for it, because Bilbo, as we're told at that point, is very fond of maps. He's got a map in his hallway, in fact, where he notes all his routes around the Shire. He loves to go and take walks in the Shire, which shows that there's something a bit in love with the wilds. Somewhere deep down inside of him, there's a wildness that's outside of this bourgeois dragon, this tame
he's got
persona that he's really assumed.
Yeah, he's got a wandering spirit. It reminds me of that Augustine quotation, that Lord, you made our hearts for you, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest. It's kind of like that. He's not like the other hobbits who just sit around on their porch waving at cars as they go by.
Right. And I think the real awakening starts, and it's interesting, as you said, gosh, what was it? You were talking about Guardinian, the Guardini's point of view. And I think there's something very Guardinian in the beginning here, where Hobbit, we're at the point, the narrative beginning, not the sort of pre-narrative matter of laying out what do we mean by a hobbit, what is a hobbit, who is this Baggins, what is his family history, which is like you might encounter in a small town. You learn more about the person's, his mother and father and whose families they're from before you even get to the point of what they're doing today. You're being introduced to somebody, which is a good way of situating him, which is not, it's sort of situating him on the social map first. Here's where he is. We're given a lot of detail at the beginning of the chapter, so we know Bilbo's position in the world. That's true. I think what a map does in general, is it gives us a place in the world. And if it's a map of something bigger than what we've seen before, or a map of somewhere else, it expands our world. But here, he's not even able to see who it is on his front step, who's standing right in front of him. Gandalf shows up, and he says, "Good morning." And he meant it. It says, the text says, and he meant it. Gandalf's immediate question is to him, what do you mean? But whatever it is that he means it. And we're immediately introduced to this as you might expect from the professor of philology. This first we're talking about the meaning of things before we can talk about the things. What do we mean by these things? He himself has just written all of this. But his name, Bilbo doesn't have the eyes to see who this is that's in front of him. Right? He doesn't have the eyes to see. He should recognize him. Gandalf knows he should recognize him. That's why he says, you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it.
Right.
Which puts the thing with the authority, the thing with agency is the name. And so there's something very powerful to being named, to having a particular name. And he says, Gandalf means, I'm Gandalf, and Gandalf means me, which is similar to what we see, of course, later on in the Lord of the Rings, which is a conversation to have next year at this time. We finally get around to that in Tom Bombadil, and he's, Frodo asked him, who is Tom Bombadil? And Goldberry just says, he is.
Yes.
Right. I'm Tom Bombadil. It's my name. It's the only answer. We are one with our name, but there's something here that's an identity that's being woven. And he's Gandalf. Wait, he remembers something, and we're told that by which he remembers. Oh, you did all these wonderful fireworks and all of this, and the fireworks he describes as looking like different kinds of garden flowers. And Tolkien tells us that by which you can tell that Bilbo wasn't quite so prosaic as he liked to think, and also that he was very fond of flowers. But there's a beginning of an awakening here in the encounter with somebody else who's come crashing in on your world and introduced a very disturbing proposition for you that you should come on an adventure.
Yeah, and not just any somebody too. And that really good points, Cameron. Not just any somebody. This is an angel, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
we don't learn that until a little later on. Probably, I think it's in Lord of the Rings that we begin to get an inkling.
Really into Lord of the Rings, yeah.
But he's an angel, and it's funny. There's a comic element there because Gandalf, when he comes to him, he tells him something that makes him tremulous, and he goes back into his house and has to have a biscuit. So
Right.
Gandalf,
Like
as an
Piglet, he's got to bring himself down a little bit.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, boost his endorphins. Gandalf ends up telling him something that makes him fearful, and the opening of any "fear not," right? They say that all the time, "fear not," because anytime an angel appears, something is going to happen. The angel isn't like there to order a hot, and so Gandalf appearing, something's going to happen, even if you go back inside and shut the door. So he's having an angelic visitation at the beginning. I do like, I do like some of the things that Joseph Campbell says, and I like his outlining of the hero's journey and all this, and the catalyst comes to the messenger that comes to spark the hero's journey. But one thing that Campbell doesn't seem to emphasize is that you do have moments where you have a visitation that's an angelic visitation.
Yeah.
And if you do have them, they're terrifying, and it means you really have to change. This isn't just some suggestion. It's not like the 10.
Exactly.
So Gandalf coming really becomes the start of the hero's journey for the story, but he's also he's the divine breaking into the mundane world, the bourgeois world, and he breaks that otherwise that continuous static cycle that Bilbo is in, where he's been living now, the man under the hill, so to speak, for years and years and years.
Yeah.
I really liked your point too about placing him in the Hobbit world as the son of Bungo and the son of Belladonna Took. That he is part of a family. He's fixed. He's in a family tree, which is another kind of map.
Mm-hmm.
He himself is known in the community. Everybody knows him. They put him in a box.
He's a Baggins. You could know what a Baggins thinks about something without the bother of having to ask.
Yeah, without having to ask. But he's about to break out of all that and do really weird things by Hobbit standards. And so, again, there's this atrophy going on, and the atrophy has to be cured by him going on this adventure. So all the stuff that he doesn't like about the dwarves and sleeping in the rain and visiting with trolls and all that is there in order to cure this problem that you had before, which is even worse than getting captured by orcs, or even worse than having to face spiders in the forest. I also really, if I can go back to it for just a minute, I liked your point too, and his walks, his walks around the land. When I was a kid, we used to vacation in Kentucky, and we would go to Natural Bridge State Park in Kentucky, walk around in the forest, and that was really great. But they always had these signs, here's the trail for such and such trail, and here's the trail for Blue Trail, and all that would be mapped out. And so when you read these signs, you'd think, oh, I know exactly where I'm going. I'm going to be on the trail. Everything's going to be nice and ordered and under my control. And it turns out it isn't that way, because when you actually go out in the forest, there is no actual blue line to follow necessarily. It's not like Jurassic Park where you just stay in the Jeep and just cruise through.
Right.
The Pirates of the Caribbean do get off the ride and eat you. And I think that's kind of, again, going back to that idea of power. There seems to be a natural thing in human beings where we want to control. Speaking of men especially, we want to control. We want to have things in order and things set in place. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it may be that's part of the trap that Tolkien is addressing as well, is the desire to control everything, the desire to have everything in its place and fixed, and then once it's there, nobody should mess with my stuff. Don't mess with my crap, man. Because of course we see that in Lord of the Rings, right? That's the big guy. That's Sauron himself. He's the Lord of power that wants to control everything, and when he does control everything becomes kind of a wasteland. So if you can take Hobbit novel and project it out into that Lord world, the Lord of the Rings world, you see that what he's developing here in the Hobbit is already this kernel of an idea that takes off when we get to that trilogy later on.
Yeah. And it's important that in order to become something different than what you are, you have to do something radical. There's an
Yeah.
angelic visitation. Somebody has come crashing into your world, and Bilbo has a choice. And if we're reading deeply, we're following along. We're right there with Bilbo.
Yeah.
We have a choice. We can follow him, or we can not. We can go or not.
Yes.
And he struggles. He waffles, dithers, but
I think this is why W.H. Auden was so praiseworthy of the book. You know, he's famous for having written that there are two people in the world: those who haven't read Tolkien and those who have yet to. Because I think Auden saw that Tolkien's art, his novel creation, spoke to a universal experience of humanity.
yeah.
And a problem of humanity, which I think is probably the problem of power, of control. And at the beginning, you have a little guy who's comic, but he is definitely on the possible road to becoming this Sauron character, this dragon character, or Smaug character, as the case may be.
Yeah.
Question too, because I've always wondered this: when Gandalf says, "I am me," you know, Gandalf means. I certainly agree with the idea that name means person, you know, and the name and person ultimately united. But there's also the problem that Tolkien was a philologist, and he drew those names, Gandalf and the Dwarves. He drew them from I think it was the Poetic Edda, not the prose one. I think it was the Poetic Edda. This list of names that goes on in the Poetic Edda. And every Dwarvish name has a meaning in English. In fact, well, names all have. So, you know, your average Joe, your average Bill, your average Peter. But we don't realize what we're saying is, you know, your average stronghead, your average dreamer, your average rock. We don't hear that because we hear just the name. So when we hear Gandalf, we don't hear the translation, which is, what I have in front of me anyway, is magic elf or wolf elf. Wand elf. Gandalf, one of the dwarves.
Wand elf. Yeah.
He is the magic elf, the wolf elf. How does that have any bearing on his statement that Gandalf means me? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to, and then certainly, you know, in the next, in the Lord of the Rings, as the universe sort of develops behind, we're told other names that he has as well.
Yes.
And that certainly, I think, works back. It's not illegitimate to say in a piece of mythology, which is what this is, that works backwards too, to influence how we understand that here, because it's a further explication of it. But yeah, I mean, if he's, you know, a wolf figure, that is a figure that's usually the locus of some sort of transformation, comes in, is frightful. It's something that's wild, right? Not necessarily evil, but wild. I mean, there's the wolf in the what's that Russian tale about the golden bird or the firebird? Right?
Yeah, the
firebird. The wolf is a helper figure, but is not tame. He's not safe. And so there's something there that this wolf elf, or this what did you say, the magic elf? It further emphasized the notion that he's a angelic visitor. He is something from outside the world. He's a mystic figure who's coming in to awaken something, right? He's a power, and you know, in the biblical sense of the word, as some sort of creature, one of the powers of the heavens, right? That we tamely call angel, to waken Bilbo out of his slumber.
Yeah.
And to the names thing, I was just quick looking up. There's a great quote from the Never-Ending Story, which is another great piece of literature that to read in conjunction with this, to understand how you should enter into it. But the quote from the story, and that's The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende, for those who aren't familiar with it. Very, very popular book back 20, 30 years ago, but highly recommended for it. But the quote is that only the right name gives things and beings their reality. A wrong name makes everything unreal. That's what lies do. So the right name gives things and beings their reality, but the wrong name makes them unbe. Very dear. I think that's intricately woven in with this moment in the story, precisely because, as his hobbit hole was described, it has nasturtium flowers coming down. Now, why are the nasturtiums important?
Yeah, right.
Why do we care about nasturtiums? Why should we, the reader, not just in the story? Because there's a whole story, there's a whole drama in the production and publication of this book around the name of a thing. Tolkien went to fisticuffs with his editor over this because his editor corrected Mr. Shums. And if you go to any garden center today, at least in the Anglophone America, and you get the seeds for this kind of flower, you want to buy these potted flowers, you will see they are named nasturtiums with an IUMS.
Wow.
But the real name is nasturtian with an IANS. And nasturtians are the things that are, they've got the bright orange flowers, kind of a trumpet shape. It's these things, and they've got a heart-shaped leaf. And these are the things that you would plant, above the Hobbit hole, and they would kind of dangle down around the windows, something like this. But Tolkien was very adamant that the correct term is nasturtian, not nasturtium.
Why?
And because only the right name gives things their reality. The wrong name makes them unreal. Because a nasturtium is not just a change in pronunciation, but a nasturtium is literally a different kind of plant. That's cress. Mm-hmm. So Tolkien actually went so far. He's like, he's English philology guy. He knows words, right? But he goes and he talks to the gardener, and he says, this here, nasturtium. And the gardener says, nasturtium? No, that's cress. This here's a nasturtium. Wow. Nasturtium is the Latin name for a certain kind of cress. They might be vaguely related to each other, somewhat, but they're very different plants. So the one is the kind of, it's not necessarily watercress, but it's an upland cress of some sort, and it's not the same kind of plant. It's not the garden flower. Incidentally, also edible. At least the flowers are. They taste really good on salad, really good on a pizza, for that matter. But without getting too far afield here, because they'll put anything on pizza in Italy here, except pineapples. That's evidently a no-no. But flowers, potatoes, roots, you name it, it can go on a pizza. But that's important. So sort of meta, outside of the text, the structure of this piece of literature itself, we know that the sort of the meta story around the production of this book, that's a thing that Tolkien feels very strongly about, is the right names for things.
And again, he's a stickler for detail. Tolkien was. Yeah. This sort of thing is a classic example of what I'm talking about, where he would go and talk to the gardener, for goodness sake. He would go and look things up. And he was very of symbolism, of ancient world symbolism, Norse symbolism. And so he, not only is he looking for the right spelling of the word, but he's for the right flower, because flowers represent things. The flowers have meaning in themselves. The nasturtiums are victory or success, is what they are famous for being connected to. They're a golden or orange flower, single, I think five petals, I want to say. So cinquefoil flower. So they have a numerical symbolism there. They've got a color symbolism there. They've got a time of year that they grow symbolism there. They have a historical ideas symbolism. So in that one little symbol, Tolkien has packed incredible meaning, that Bilbo has essentially surrounded himself with the medals of past victories, so to speak. His whole entrance into his home is surrounded by sort of self-congratulatory, I'm the conqueror. Look at me. I'm fat. I've got pipe tobacco and food and a home. Look how good I am. Aren't I good? Yes. And very self-congratulatory, really. You could say, you look at the color of the flowers, like little medallions of gold and orange, that's his treasure trove right there. A happy little hobbit hole is his treasure trove. So Gandalf comes into that and he says, "Okay, guess what? You're going to leave all this behind and go away for an extended period of time." Because when it's time to go, it's time to go, and you may not come back alive. Right. Yes, and that's another good point right there. Is that when it's time to go, it's time to go. Part of the trap of a materialist view is you get your whole world in order and everything's perfect and all this, and like in the parable you mentioned, then you have a cardiac arrest. And what the hell good does all that do you? What is all that stickler to detail, making sure everything's in its right place, and you've got the best dishwasher and refrigerator? What does all that mean when suddenly you're struck down? And that's why, if you want to put a philosophic twist on it, that's why this novel, like philosophy, is a preparation for death. Because Bilbo doesn't go through this journey, then he doesn't have the strength to be able to face what he has to eventually face. And again, to project into the Lord of the Rings, what does he have to face? Well, on the one hand, he has to face the fact that he is an addict to the ring. There's that great scene in Rivendell where Frodo shows him the ring, and he almost kills Frodo to get it right there in Rivendell.
Yes.
But he controls himself.
That's right.
This is what that whole there and back again Hobbit's journey Hobbit's holiday. That's what that was all for, to prepare me so that I don't strike down the person I love in order to take the thing I'm addicted to. And then, of course, when it goes to the Grey Havens, which symbolizes in a way like the Dormition of the Virgin Mary, it symbolizes a pleasant death, a peaceful death for him. And he's able to face it. He's able to say, I want this. I want to go on this journey. I don't want to cling to life and all the nasturtiums around the door of my hobbit hole anymore, which is a huge deal. I mean, that's a big deal. So really, it's this journey for Bilbo that makes him capable of doing any of that. I've always been struck along that line. I've always been struck how when Tolkien writes this map, creates this map, he creates a map of Thror, which we see in the novel, but that just begins there with the misty mountains on one side. Goes off to see where Lonely Mountain is. You see Mirkwood and all this. It doesn't show you where Hobbiton is. And he later commissioned somebody to do a map to his specifications, which is what of the Rings. And that one shows us that the Misty Mountains actually extend to the north and curl around in the small foothills that begin really just outside of Hobbiton. And so the hill where Bilbo lives is actually one of the first of these little foothills that curl around and eventually become those huge Misty Mountains.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so that connection not only connects Bilbo directly to the Misty Mountains, and then of course the Lonely Mountain, which is almost in the map is almost what's the term? It's equidistant from the Misty Mountains as his home is on either side.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, if you look at it. But
it also connects him down to the south where Mordor is, because the mountains extend down into Gorgoroth and the plains of Mordor there. And as I pointed out to my students, is that later map that he commissioned, under his specifications, this was not just, go draw me a map.
Right.
That map really represents a dragon image itself. The curling around from Hobbiton around to the north to the Iron Hills and then down. That's a shape of a dragon. It's the tail of a dragon. The backbone is the Misty Mountains. Mordor is the mouth of the dragon. Eye of the dragon is where Rodruin is. And then you have even the neck of the dragon is where the dragon would sit. And of course, that's Orthanc. That's where Sauron is.
Right.
So Tolkien was obviously thinking about that connection of dragon to map to Bilbo. And again, there are moments where I start talking about this and I'm like, I have to stop. I'm like, God, this guy's a genius. It's like you're looking at all these elements and it's just, how did he do this?
Which means that, what you're describing to that, so what you're saying is that the map that Tolkien had drawn up, the whole Middle Earth map from Lord of the Rings, itself contains secrets that if you know what moon to look at it under, they come to light.
That's right.
Just like Thror's map in the story contains secrets, right? This is no ordinary map.
Yeah.
There's perhaps even words yet written that we haven't seen because they were written under a different moon.
Yes.
One kind of indicates that.
Yes.
But these things they are a story that can waken your world somehow.
I will, what you just said just gave me chills, because what we talk about when we talk about seeing things under a different moon, we're talking about when we see them at a different age in our life, or we see them at a different age in world history, or we see them because now we have access to something we didn't have access to before. That's really what that metaphor means. And so one classic example of this is the Palantir in Lord of the Rings. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the Palantir brings these dark spheres that you gaze into them and you can see long distances of things happening or things that will happen, so that you have perspective on the world that other people don't have, because you can see a long distance, right? Procol Harum, as the band used to be called, seeing things at a distance. And so that Palantir allows you this tremendous power and therefore control, apparent control, because you can react.
Right.
But in Lord of the Rings, of course, they've been captured and corrupted and twisted. So anything you see is always conditioned by those that want to show you something and not show you something else, or show you something in a certain light with a certain.
It's like
language.
looking something up
On the internet.
It's like looking something up on Google or on Facebook. Yeah, it shows you things,
but my point is that Tolkien wrote about those bloody things in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
That's 30 years, 40 years before the internet was even a glint in some engineer's eye. Okay.
Right.
So talk about moon letters. That whole thing is moon letters. It's like a prophetic thing. This is where we're headed. We're going to get it. We're going to get this thing eventually. It's not going to be nice, It's going to twist the warden of the city into something very dark.
Right.
Yeah. Well, dang. Okay, that was a tangent that I didn't go up
into the future.
Yeah.
But here we are with the maps, and the maps expand the world. And now, what happens when Bilbo encounters this? Somebody breaks into his world. There's a real encounter. Then these dwarves start showing up on his front step. They all pop in, and he sits there. Says, "What? Did you get a group raid or something?" And they all kind of flood in, and then there they are. Yeah. And what is happening to Bilbo when this starts when this is all going on?
He's sort of the servant. He's sort of like serving them tea and cakes and coffee and beer and tea and all this, and watching as his house is turned upside down, turned into disarray.
Right.
And it's quite disturbing to him, but he doesn't stop. I mean, there's no point in there where he just says, "Okay, dwarves, get the hell out, get off my lawn." He doesn't do that. He kind of, he's taken aback by it, I think, and on his heels. So finally, when they settle down and they begin talking business, they say, he says, "Do you want some light?" Right? And they say, "No, we like it, dark for dark things or dark business." And they start talking or singing about it, as the case may be. And then they pull out the map, right? Gandalf, time for the map. They pull out the map, they look at the map, and Bilbo gets all excited because he loves maps. And that's where they say, "We're on this journey to get gold back from the dragon, and you're coming with us." That's the big reveal, right? You're the burglar. And there's a scene in there which I absolutely love. And I haven't seen the movie, so just bear with me, because I can't say they did it poorly in the movie, but they probably did. I know they did in the Rankin Bass version. When they say, "You're the burglar, and we will pay for your funeral expenses," he lets out this shriek, and he passes out.
Right.
And I love that scene. They carry him into another room, and they ply him with biscuits in order to wake him up. But first off, part two. I love the second part too, which I'll get you in a minute.
Yeah,
that part I love because first off, if you've ever heard, the shriek is tremendous, and the fainting, I think, is redolent of Dante and his experience there in hell, various places, because he's just. This is tremendous. No, this is not what I wanted, Lord. But the shriek is interesting because if you've ever heard a rabbit caught by a cat, they shriek, "Billy ho!" It's terrifying. I mean, and it's a natural reaction in order to drive away predators, but it's also just tremendous, like something out of hell. And that's what I envision with Bilbo, which is apropos. Because the Bilbo character is a twofold character. He's Took and Baggins. Took on the hand is the warrior adventurer going out in the world, checking stuff out and getting treasure. Baggins is I think that's right. And Baggins is a self-congratulatory, sort of ordinary, average hobbit type.
Yeah, so very comfortable, very predictable.
And so in that sense, he's a unity of these two, which I think is a great parallel for what a human being is. But he's a parallel between two mythical figures. We talked about Gandalf as a mythical wolf figure. Mythical rabbit dragon combination, which is kind of like, if a dragon makes a rabbit, but we don't necessarily have to go there.
This is good. He's a rabbit, because he's what they even give they give the description. That's put in here. I don't remember where. Oh, with the eagles, he's described like a rabbit.
Yes.
But here he's described like a dragon.
Yep.
Fierce as a dragon in a pinch. I know he
No,
seems a bit jumpy.
more like a grocer than a dragon, they say, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But even in the description of the opening that you talked about, you know, what is a hobbit, where Tolkien goes to explain that, he describes them as being round in the middle and furry-footed, and they don't wear shoes.
That's right.
So there's
Right.
this.
And they live in a warren.
Yeah, it's a warren, right? It's like Watership Down by Douglas Adams, or Richard Adams. Douglas Adams, different.
Different story.
But you know, he lives the life of a comfortable rabbit. He is in his little burrow. He's got his old rabbit colony around him. He's got the furry feet. He's got tons of food, and he's kind of timid in a way. And that's his bag. That's his bag inside.
Yeah.
So when he shrieks, that's a rabbit reaction. You know,
it's a rabbit in its death throat. Feel right. I mean, it's seized by the throat by a wolf, for instance.
Yeah. Well, as an example. You know, we have coyotes, and you hear the coyotes out here, and they make this yipping sound. But then when they catch something like a rabbit, it's like yip, yip, yip. I'm locking my door and staying inside. That's kind of like what happens, I think, with the Bilbo character. It's caught by the wolves or dwarves, and he shrieks, he freaks out, and then faints. But then there's that second part, which I find really interesting, because then the Tookish side kind of comes alive. As you said,
wake up.
Yeah, the Baggins dies, the Took comes alive, because he hears that comment by, I don't forget who it is, Balin maybe, or Dwalin, who says he seems more like a green grocer than a dragon. And he gets all like, well, I'm going to go in there and show them I'm no green grocer, you know?
Yeah, right.
That's his foot into the trap, or his hand in the honey jar, or whatever it is, because he show those dwarves, and he can't get out of it once he makes that commitment, which is tremendous.
Right,
tremendous.
Yeah,
but the courage to do that, the thumotic element, as the Greeks called it, you know, calling up of that middle thumos thing, is really what ends up being the salvific character for him, because he rises to a challenge, and he comes back into, for whatever reasons, he comes back into human society or dwarvish society, and takes on this journey that's going to change him. And I think that, again, is a big element of this story as a anagogical work. Artwork is supposed to be challenging to us. If it's not challenging, it's kitsch. You know, that's what there's a great philosopher who just died. I lost his name. The Intelligent Person's Guide to the Modern World, and I can see
his face, but I can't remember his name.
He talks about kitsch all the time. He says that kitsch is something which is a palliative. It just confirms all our preconceived notions, and it makes us feel nice and warm, but it's substanceless. There's nothing there, really.
Yeah.
Where work itself is supposed to be something that challenges us, that we look at it, we say, wow, I never thought about things before that way, to evoke some emotional response.
Yeah, it's supposed to be in sort of Guardinian terms, like Romano Guardini, more like a looking glass that you step through into another world.
Right, exactly. The Homeric comment that Homer holds up a mirror to us so we can see ourselves. That it's supposed to force you to look at who you are and where your weaknesses are, but also where your strengths are. Here's little Bilbo suddenly realizing he's a rabbit shrieking, but then when he hears that comment, he has that Tookish side woken up in him, and he responds to that too. Because there's a paradoxical, I think, realization that every human has to come to. That on the one hand, we are nothing. We are worthless. Who are we in the universe? We are like not even a speck. We're less than that. It's truly daunting. That in 2 generations, most all of us will be forgotten. People will not remember us. That most of us are frail, and we are puny, and we aren't really dynamic. You know, we don't respond well to trauma at all. And that's one hand. You know, who are? But then on the other hand, you have to realize, paradoxically, you are everything. You are the reason of the universe. You know, you are the thing. God so loved you that he gave his only son that you should be free. That who am I, Lord, that you should visit me, right? And holding those two sides at the same time, I think is difficult, because we tend to go on the one, oh, I'm a worm, oh, I'm a deity, but it's absolutely necessary, because if we go all one way or all the other way, we end up being something monstrous. And this is again a novel showing us this, I think, over and over again. If we go to the self-satisfied Fagin side, we end up thinking I'm worthless. What am I? I'm a nothing. You know, I'm a little slimy creature living in a hole under the earth in a lake, right?
Just like another one we'll meet. Yeah, exactly.
But if you go the other route, which is I am tremendous, I'm the most important thing in all creation, nobody's better than I am, well, then you're the smog. You know, no one,
Right.
I am power. My claws are death. You know,
Right.
and neither way is really, that's not
Not a good place to be.
Not a good place to be. So the novel seems to me to be a great catalyst for waking a person up to whether you're a rabbit or a dragon, or whether you're a dragon rabbit, which in a medieval world, by the way, is perfectly acceptable. You look at these manuscripts and you see like kangaroo dragon thingies all over the place. And they had no problem with that paradoxical nature going on.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
The important thing is to be more like a griffin and not like a chimera or a manticore.
Yes.
Right. There's different combinations. Put in the wrong order are disastrous. Put in the right order or something.
Right.
Magical and noble.
Let me ask you something here, to not switch gears entirely, but you know, he has the dwarves come in and they all pile into his house, and most of the time people think of them as sort of a lump. They're not in, they're just like, you know, Ori, Dory, Fori, Gory, Bori, Tori, Sori, Marty, you know, and people are like, they're just dwarves, just a bunch of dwarves. And that may be because as humans, we can't count beyond 3, which I learned recently. Hard time doing that. We're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Isn't it how they essentially arrive into his house, the 1, 2, 3, and then whatever the buster comes in?
You know, however, Jeff, I love that. And if you don't think that's the case, then you look at one person, it's one person, 2 people, 3 people, 3 people. Looks maybe like 4, I guess 5. And then you start climbing up, you're like, it's a crowd, it's a mob.
It's just a throng at this point.
Throng.
It's not,
I'm waiting for the rest of the throng. But if we don't lump them all together, what do we make of these dwarves? I mean, what do we make of dwarvish power in general? And are they individuals at all? Or are they just a lot of singing twits that are really the same thing reduplicated over and over again?
Well, they all come in, they come crashing into Bilbo's world, initially one at a time, like water that's water that's been long held back by a dam, trickles first, and then breaks through, right? There's been enough eroded. Incidentally, but they trickle through one by one, and they've paced, it's almost like they've paced themselves out ahead of time, like this is planned, so as not to all get turned away at once. It's a strategy that we know Gandalf uses later on in the story.
with the big Bilbo.
Right, with the big Bilbo. And Bilbo, the charming is Bilbo still, even then, halfway through the book, seems not to catch on that these essentially was hoodwinked in the beginning, that these guys were paced. You know, you go in one at a time. But then the rest, they bump in. But no, I mean, I think there's definitely different personalities. I think that's something that's hard to suss out in the first chapter, but I think later on we see, as he becomes, maybe that's just it. That's the genius of the writing, is that to Bilbo now, they're just a throng of dwarves.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know them. He's not become one of them yet. But when he becomes one of them, he begins to learn their distinct personalities and has different relationship with different dwarves. And that reaches quite a climax in the besieging of the Lonely Mountain that we see later on. So very, very diverse kinds of relationships with the different dwarves that he develops there.
Yeah.
But they do have a power. They have a magic. And it doesn't seem to be individual. It seems that they work in tandem together to work this magic. There's a charming magic. They get these instruments out of nowhere, out of their little their these little Mary Poppins bags. All of a sudden, here's a cello. Where have you been hiding that? And where'd you go with it afterwards?
Yeah.
That's the mystery.
again, going back to names, we see them as just a continuation of this naming. One is named the same as all the rest, or something like that. But they do seem to have different. Their names mean different things, and therefore they have different powers or different realms that they command, or that they are governing over, so to speak. And I'm just going out randomly here because I called up the list of. You can find this stuff on
what are the names?
It's gonna need, but just random stuff. If we looked at like Feely, for instance, Feely is the one who flies, right? And he's, of course, his brother Keely. Keely means wedge. And you've got Bifur Bafur Bombur, which is a good combination, right? Bifur is the quaking one. He also represents the animal, the beaver. And you've got Bifur Bafur Bombur, means the drummer or the swollen one. So all of them have names which, if they aren't in Swedish, I'm assuming it's Swedish, if they aren't in Swedish, you can see them as the names of angels, or the names of even of demons, because the demons and angels have similar types of monikers. One who lurks, the Lord of the Light, the name of God, or who is like God. So they're translated like control over powers, or control over auspices of things. So really, like your analogy of the water pouring in is very apt, because what we're getting here is we're not just getting crazy singing dwarves coming in, and romping everywhere. We're getting the powers of the earth pouring in suddenly to his little hobbit, flooding the hobbit hole. It's like he's suddenly encountering the possibility that there are powers out there greater than himself, which he does have an affinity towards, in terms of like they're the same height, they kind of speak the same. He has a Chookish side, but yet he has isolated himself so much in this little fortress of solitude that he doesn't recognize that maybe there's something beyond this world that he has to reckon with. The power of the waking one, or the power of the drummer. I'll let you in on a little state. And what other artists were thinking about is that these powers are always governing over some auspice of human existence, human life.
Yes.
I think that's what the dwarves are. They represent governance over certain aspects of life that kind of suddenly pours in on Bilbo, as though blood coming in on him.
Right.
And then they're inviting him to come with them and be one of them. Which does raise a question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. I don't think I do. Where does that name Bilbo come from? How did he develop that name?
Bilbo.
You know?
I don't know. That is a great question.
I know that he intended to name him originally Bingo, which thank God.
Right.
Bingo, right?
No, really glad.
Yeah, but he changed it. And I don't know where he gets that at all. And I'm just looking up on my quick source, which is Quackopedia.
Right.
And it doesn't really give a satisfactory. It doesn't give a satisfactory.
No.
Okay.
No, I wonder. That's interesting. And is it in some ways? I mean, we'll have to wait the final verdict of a little more thorough research to find out from the letters if he ever reveals that. But it could be. I mean, one hypothesis is if it essentially is not doesn't have a specific referent. It perhaps has that in the same way that, a character named Antrobus or any man might. It's the point is that that's a holder for you. If it's a hollow name. I don't know though. I don't know. That's worth looking into.
Yeah, maybe it's a hollow name. Maybe it's this is you. Insert name.
Right. Here. Insert name here, kind of thing.
Maybe
that could be. I don't know. That's interesting that you say that these are the power. They're earthy powers because they're dwarves, right? They're not any kind of creature. They're dwarves, and these are these earthly powers, earthy. And he too lives in the earth, right? He's surrounded by earth, so it's like these things come in out of the walls and they shake up. Right? They sing a song. They threaten to break all his stuff and crack his plates and really upend his comfortable little cottage life. But then they sing a different song.
Yes.
And that's there's a power, there's a magic in that. And that's, they put a spell. And this is the beautiful thing. I mean, this is the old Anglo-Saxon word for story, for a tale is spell. The way we
Yes.
talk about a magic spell is the same word for a story that's told, except in that culture, right? And as you know, in Nordic culture, you don't tell stories, you sing them. And so
Yeah.
these guys are singing a spell, and
Yeah.
it has a magical power to it.
And
And we get a glimpse of that a little bit. But yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, in our culture, the God spell is our most familiar use of that term, the story of God, the God spell.
Right.
And that's why God's spell and the other scriptures were, up until recently, always sung in the Mass. And they
Right.
were Anglican Church still. You don't sing them, much like the Jews used to use the gold finger in order to point at the Torah,
Right.
because so special a thing. This is so at the core of who we are as a society that you don't denigrate it by bringing it into the ordinary vulgar tongue of speech. You elevate it to a poetic level. Yeah. So they sing their raison d'etre, their motive, their for being.
Their motive, their narrative, their story, their identity is sung. Right. They sing it. And Tolkien's even his description of it, if I may read just directly here.
Yep.
So they began to play while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room. The fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, so they were playing music. And then suddenly, first one, and then another began to sing as they played, the deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And Tolkien tells us then, and this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. So Tolkien is saying, I have glimpsed something of this in my mystical vision. Oh Muse, this is where he should turn and say, oh Muse, help me to like bring these things down into the mundane natural speech of man and try and render them in some intelligible way to my readers. And so what we see here isn't their song, but it's the most distilled down, watered, made tangible thing for us. But it was a much higher and fuller and richer, almost as if you couldn't actually, Tolkien, John couldn't write it in the book because it would be not safe. It would be the spell itself. You can't do that.
Yeah. Kind of like where Gandalf says, I refuse to utter the tongue of the Uruk-hai, the language of Mordor in your Hobbit book. Do that.
Exactly.
Maybe.
And it's a song we get this song 3 times. We get the song at three major moments in the story. Now, at the beginning of the journey, we get the song in the Hall of Beorn.
That's right.
Beorn goes out for the night, and they're left in the dark in the House of the Wild now. And then the third time is in the Lonely Mountain when they're besieged by the men and the elves. After the dragon is slain, they sing the song again, and each time it takes on a different nuance, corresponding to the point in the tale in which we are, but it's always fundamentally the same song. So they keep singing. The dwarves they've got one hit. They're a one-hit wonder. They've got one song that they keep singing, but it becomes so here it's a song of longing to reclaim their heritage.
Yeah.
In the House of Beorn, there's a sense of we're getting closer. But when they're besieged in the Lonely Mountain, it's a song of vengeance. It's a song of wrath against all enemies, that they too may perish. But who are the enemies at this point? They're your friends. These are people who have come to you asking for help.
Yeah, because they've taken
on. It turns sinister.
Yeah, they've taken on the seed.
They've become the dragon.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
we're not there yet, but this is repeated, so it's important to pay attention to.
So people have been critical of Tolkien before as not having religion in the book, but you could say in a way that for the dwarves, this is like their credo. This is their religious mantra. Yeah,
that's precisely it.
And so if you look at
what are you doing when we recite the creed? We're telling the story of the things that happened, and then the bad thing happened, and then the good thing's going to happen.
Or I'm thinking of on Easter when they recite the Gospels leading up to the resurrection, or they recite the "This is the night," that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Our recitation of who we are as Christians, it's a similar thing.
Right.
So for the dwarves, you have these 3 stages where they're telling them, and this is good because I've never really thought about this before, Cameron. if that's the case, you're looking at the credo being used in three ways. The last one was not nice. It's not a good way to use the credo, as in, Deus Vult. Now we're going to go conquer people. Now that we have established ourselves here in the Western world, let's go kick ass on anybody that disagrees.
Right.
Wait, that's not quite what Christ wanted. Hold on, guys. Shut up, Lord.
Right.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. I think that if I'm going to give credit to Jackson here. I really do think he did that well in the movie, because the singing of that song is extremely powerful in the movie. And I think he captured something of, as you say, the magic of that song. It is a very bewitching tune, a very bewitching sort of somber reflection on who they are as a people. We're scattered. We have experienced the diaspora, but we're going to go back and get our heritage again. Going back to establish our lands there in the Middle East.
Yeah, and there's a creative power to this, not only in the ambiance and the effect that it creates, but it actually generates something in Bilbo, right? It's this song that begins the death and rebirth of Bilbo here in a minor way. We see it in a major way later, but
which is what art does. It's another thing that art does, doesn't it? It recreates across the world. Sorry, telephone. It has us thinking about what the world really is about again, which we have forgotten. It's like William Carlos Williams with the red wheelbarrow. Everything's changed, transfigured, glazed. So you have a world that's actually beautiful for the first time again. You hadn't seen it that way. Read this poem, or you hear this song, or whatever, or see this movie even, and wow, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. So it does in him that ability to then rush out the house in the morning. Right.
But he's not yet creative. Bilbo sings a song, but only at the very end of the book. And that's when Gandalf remarks, you have changed. So we see that there's a seed planted, that music, that song has this power.
Wow. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. That's probably why he didn't write down, full notation for it or whatever, because it probably would have been a little.
It'd be dangerous.
Yeah. Dangerous. Yeah, it does lead to a question about, and we, just for the record, we have about 10 minutes left on my timer, but it does raise that bigger question, which we'll probably come back to in later chapters, of what is it that we're about with mythology in general? What are we about with art in general? What are we doing with art? Is the whole purpose of art, as I've said before here, anagogical, to make us reflect on ourselves? Because I think it is. But is it also perhaps in order to awaken in us that desire to go on journeys, that desire to quest for things, which isn't it's not dragonish. It's a good desire, actually, I think.
Well, a dragon does not go on a quest, right? A dragon likes to sit on their horse, steal somebody else's stuff, and then sit on it, which is not questing, right? It's the opposite. It's that power gone bad versus power channeled towards on pilgrimage of some sort, seeking a grail, right?
Seeking a grail and therefore establishing a great society in order to be able to accomplish that sort of thing, making something valuable to other people, and going out of your way to help other people, which is what Bilbo does later on with
at great risk to himself.
Yeah, right. But here at the beginning, he, like I said, he's sterile. There is no Mrs. Bilbo or little Bilbos running around. He's sterile. And so there's no, he's not giving anything to the world. So that song awakens in him not just the desire for himself to get gold. It awakens in him a desire to emerge forth into the world and do things for the world in a way, right?
There's a magnanimity that's born here.
Yeah, right, yeah.
A yearning for greatness.
It awakens a magnanimity in a person, or can awaken.
Right. And that's that. So then this as a piece of art then is not just for us for me to understand myself better, but it's a fire. It's meant to be a fire to kindle something in me to go and do, and not merely navel gaze.
Yes. What do they call that? Not evocative, but hortatory. It's a hortatory, right?
Yes.
It hortatorts you in order to get out into the world.
That's right. It torts you out of your orto, and you have to go.
Torts you out.
That is to say, it turns you out of your garden to translate that into English.
Yeah, that's a really good place to stop. I think one last thought on this: the very ending of the chapter, okay, where he getting sleepy, and the Jewish side says is wearing off, and he's not quite sure to do this.
Right.
He's tired, and as he's going to sleep, hears that song, so it enters into his dreams, right? Becomes part of his dreams. And then the ending of the chapter is not just he fell asleep, because Tolkien frequently does that. The ending of a chapter is like they fell asleep in the next chapter. Here he doesn't do that. Right. Chapter 1 ends as Bilbo went to sleep with this in his ears. It gave him very uncomfortable dreams. And then
exactly,
it was long after the break of day when he woke up.
Right.
Yeah.
It ends with him waking up.
Yeah, I know.
That's good.
That's so awesome.
That's cool.
It's a good place to stop, Cameron.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Okay, good. Well, I tell you what, this is fantastic, and I think that I look forward to looking at part 2, chapter 2 with you. And
it's like roast mutton.
Roast mutton. Let's see if we can do a little legwork, find out if we can anything about names of Bilbo, and find out about if we can get that to work.